They tied her to a flagpole for fun, but had no idea who they were messing with. You ever wake up thinking it's going to be just another day? That's exactly how Zaria Bennett felt that morning. 16, black, quiet as a shadow, but sharp enough to see through the things people pretend not to see. The kind of girl who held the door for others, even if no one said thank you. The kind who raised her hand in class only when it counted. The kind who helped out because it was the right thing to do, not because it would earn her anything. That day, she walked across the courtyard at Littleville High, arms full of history books. Her sleeves were rolled up, her eyes focused on the stack, doing her best not to drop them. She had volunteered to help Mrs. Landry carry them to the library. No audience, no reward. Just simple, steady kindness. But Littleville wasn't a place that liked quiet kindness, especially not when it came wrapped in brown skin and calm dignity. Watching her from the far end of the courtyard was Carter Rowe. Blonde buzz cut, Letterman jacket 2 sizes too proud. Son of Sheriff Glenn Rowe. He stood like the world owed him space, like rules were suggestions made for someone else, his smirk already curling at the edge of his mouth. Zaria didn't see him right away. She had too much to focus on, but Carter saw her. And to him, a quiet black girl walking tall wasn't grace. It was defiance. And Carter Rowe didn't take kindly to defiance. He strolled across the pavement with no warning and with a single swing knocked the entire box from her arms. Books hit the ground. The sound echoed. Spines cracked, pages bent like broken wings. Zaria didn't flinch. She crouched down slowly, calmly, and began gathering the books one by one. She moved like they were sacred, like nothing Carter did was going to shake her peace. But that calmness, that silence, it got under his skin. It always did. "Think you're smart?" he said, standing over her. "Miss Librarian, carrying books like you run the place." She didn't respond. That made it worse. Carter glanced toward his friends. One of them reached into his backpack and pulled out a leather belt. No one asked why it was there. The others moved quickly. One grabbed her shoulder, another reached around her back. And in a matter of seconds, they tied Zaria Bennett to the flagpole in the center of the courtyard. The leather belt was wrapped tight, her arms pinned. Her body pressed against cold steel. She didn't scream, didn't fight. She simply stood there, somewhere between dignity and disbelief. The courtyard filled with scattered laughter. Not from everyone, but from enough. A few students pulled out phones. Someone whispered. A couple shook their heads and kept walking, but no one stepped forward. And Zaria? She looked past them all. Not at Carter. Not at the crowd, not at the phones, but at something no one else could see. Something older than their cruelty. Something stronger than the belt they had wrapped around her. Because what they didn't know, what Carter could never imagine, was that Zaria had been training since she was 7. Years of martial arts, state tournaments, trophies that collected dust in her closet, and a black belt that rested in a drawer at home, not because she forgot it, but because she had chosen peace, because self-control, she was taught, was the highest form of strength. She could have broken free. She could have dropped him on the pavement before the first laugh ever left his throat. But she didn't. Not because she was weak, but because she was waiting. Waiting for the moment when silence would speak louder than fists. When her calm would make their cruelty obvious. when the truth would land so heavy that even laughter couldn't carry it. That moment was coming, and when it did, they would all remember the girl they tried to humiliate. The one they tied to a flagpole, the one who refused to break, the one who stood still and made the world move. It took exactly 3 minutes for the wrong person to show up. Ms. Landry turned the corner into the courtyard, clipboard in hand, expecting to find Zaria halfway to the library. Instead, she froze mid-step. Her pen slipped from her fingers and hit the ground without a sound. Zaria stood tied to the school's flagpole like a forgotten prop. Her books were scattered, her face blank. Her dignity hung in the air like smoke after a fire. And for one long second, even Ms. Landry couldn't move. Then her voice broke through the silence like glass. "Untie her, now!" Every head turned. The laughter stopped as if someone had flipped a switch. Carter Rowe just smirked. He didn't move. Didn't even look at Zaria. His arms were folded and his voice was low and sarcastic. She said she liked it that way. Said it made her feel special. For a second, nobody breathed. The crowd split like water around stone as Mr. Travers came running from the main building. His face was red. He looked half panicked, half confused, like he was trying to catch up to a situation he already knew was out of control. He yanked the belt loose, helped Zaria down. Her arms trembled from stiffness, not fear. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were burning. "Who did this?" Mr. Travers asked, looking around. His voice wavered between authority and desperation. "Wasn't anybody," one of the boys mumbled, barely glancing up from his phone. She tied herself. "It's some kind of trend." Ms. Landry started to speak, but someone beat her to it. "I have video." A freshman girl stood near the edge of the crowd. Her hands shook as she held up her phone. Her voice was high and thin, like she wasn't sure she'd just said it out loud. Carter turned his head slowly. His fake smile faded. His eyes landed on her like a shadow. "You sure about that?" he asked as he walked past her. Not loud. Not direct, but cold. She didn't say another word. And that was it. The crowd began to scatter. Phones slipped back into pockets. A few whispered. Some walked away like they hadn't just witnessed something wrong. Something ugly. Something dangerous. And when it came time for someone to stand up, everyone looked down. Zaria sat in the front office 20 minutes later. Her hands were still raw, where the belt had pressed into her wrists. Across from her sat Principal Whitmore, Mr. Travers, and a representative from the district office who looked like she had stepped out of a different century. "We're not saying this was your fault," the principal began. His voice was measured, polite, and wrapped in something that felt like apology without admitting anything. But some of the students felt you might have been provoking attention. Zaria didn't look at him. She stared at the wall behind him. Her shoulders were stiff. Her jaw tight, her breath held, provoking attention. She had been carrying books. That was it. She had carried books, and now she was being blamed for the way others responded to her quiet, her posture, her skin. That was when she learned something most kids shouldn't have to learn in school. Silence. When you're black, is never just silence. It can be mistaken for a threat, for attitude, for a statement you didn't make, or worse, for permission. And the people in charge? They're often more afraid of making waves than doing what's right. Mrs. Landry stood behind her. Her fists were clenched. She had wanted to speak up in the meeting. But she'd been told to let administration handle it. Zaria didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just sat, listening to people weigh her pain like it was a public relations problem, something to manage, something to minimize. Not something real. They asked her if she wanted to go home. She said no. They asked if she wanted to file a report. She said she'd think about it, but inside, something had already shifted. Something permanent. After school, she didn't get on the bus. She didn't walk home. She didn't stop at the store or answer the text her mum had sent asking if everything was all right. She walked past the baseball field, past the playground, past the place where she'd spent 3 summers teaching self-defense to kids too young to understand what they were learning. And she walked through the doors of the one place where her silence had always meant something different. The dojo. The air smelled like sweat and leather and old wood. The mats were clean, but worn. The trophies on the wall had started to fade from sunlight, but they still stood in neat rows, symbols of effort, of control, of earned respect. Coach Darryl Quinn stood by the heavy bag, 60 years old. Shoulders like carved stone, eyes that saw past bravado. He didn't say anything at first. Zaria took off her shoes, walked to the mat, tightened her belt like it was the only thing holding her together. Then she turned toward the bag and hit it. Once. Twice. By the 5th punch, it was swinging. By the 10th, she wasn't thinking about the flagpole, or Carter, or the crowd, or the voice that told her she might have provoked it. By the 20th, there was only breath, rhythm, control. Coach Quinn didn't interrupt. He didn't ask questions. He just watched her burn through the weight of a day she couldn't explain to anyone else. When she finally stopped, her fists were trembling under the wraps. "You know, strength isn't always the answer," he said quietly. Zaria didn't look at him. She was breathing hard, sweat dripping from her chin, but her voice was calm. What if silence is worse? Coach didn't argue. He didn't offer some lesson from a fortune cookie. He just nodded. Walked to the corner, picked up an old chest protector from the wall. Faded. Frayed. Stained with years of lessons. He handed it to her like a promise. Then train like your life depends on it, because sometimes it does. 2 days later, the sun was high and hot over Littleville High. Lunchtime? The courtyard buzzed with the usual noise of teenagers escaping class for 45 minutes of fried food, gossip, and stretching legs. But something in the air felt different. Zaria Bennett stood in the center of it all, headphones draped around her neck, not playing anything. Backpack slung over one shoulder, her stance relaxed. Her face unreadable. She wasn't looking to be seen, but she wasn't hiding anymore either. Some students stole glances at her from the lunch tables. Some whispered. Most just avoided looking for too long. No one had said much since the flagpole incident. It had floated around the edges of conversations, but never landed. Too uncomfortable. Too close to the truth. But not for Carter Rowe. He walked across the courtyard like nothing had changed. That familiar smirk still clinging to his face like a badge of entitlement. No belt this time, just swagger. And the same old belief that no one would stop him, not teachers, not classmates. Not even Zaria. He came straight for her, arms open, like he was offering a hug made of bad intentions. "Round 2, he said. The words oozed out like gum stuck on concrete, Zaria didn't answer, didn't blink. That seemed to bother him more than anything. He stepped closer. Too close. Then he reached, like he was going to shove her again. Like she was still the girl tied to a pole in his mind. Still small, still quiet, but this time she moved. Fast. Before his hand got halfway to her shoulder, her fingers snapped around his wrist. Not tight. Not wild, just precise, clean. Firm. What the... He barely got the words out before she pivoted. Her foot anchored. Her body rotated. In one smooth motion, she dropped him to his knees. A thud rang out across the concrete. People looked up, phones came out, but this time, no one laughed. Carter squirmed, trying to pull his arm free. Zaria didn't let go. She bent slightly, just enough for him to hear her. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. I'm only getting started. He panicked. Yanked. His breath hitched. You're hurting me, he yelled. Zaria loosened her grip slightly, gave him space to move. He scrambled to his feet, pride stinging more than the impact. He lunged, sloppy, desperate. All instinct, no control. Zaria turned again. This time, her foot swept low. Carter's legs left the ground like a rug had been yanked from beneath him. He hit the pavement, palms first, then chest, then face. The sound echoed like a dropped cymbal. Someone gasped. Someone else muttered, "Oh my God." Zaria stood over him. Not proud, not smug, not vengeful. Just still, anchored, like a tree that had stopped bending and decided to root itself instead. Carter rolled over, his white jersey torn across the back, one knee scraped raw. His lip bleeding just enough to sting. He looked up at her like he didn't recognize her. Maybe he didn't. She didn't raise her voice, didn't posture for the cameras. She didn't need to. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming space, reclaiming silence, reclaiming control. The courtyard, once filled with chatter, now held something else. Respect. Maybe not from everyone, but from enough. Zaria turned and walked away. No final words, no dramatic exit, just the same quiet strength that once made her invisible, now holding every eye. By sunset, the video had already hit 500,000 views. By midnight, it was over 2 million. No filters. No music, no edits, just raw footage of Carter Rowance, the king of the courtyard, folded on the ground by the girl he tried to humiliate. A girl who said nothing and let her presence speak volumes. By sunrise, the world had already seen it. Zaria Bennett's takedown of Carter Row had spread like wildfire. The video had been shared, stitched, reposted, dissected, and slowed down, frame by frame. No background music, no edits. Just raw truth. The caption read, "Boy ties black girl to flagpole. She's a black belt. Watch what happens next." That was all it took. By the time students started arriving at Littleville High that morning, the clip had passed 3.8 million views. By lunchtime, it had doubled. Hashtags exploded across platforms. Justice for Zaria, but not broken. Let her speak. TikTok commentators broke it down like sports analysts reviewing a game-winning play. YouTube creators uploaded essays about systemic silence. Twitter fed on every second of it, replaying the moment Carter hit the pavement like it was the end of a movie people had been waiting years to see. And through all of it, Zaria said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence had finally found a microphone. That afternoon, news vans parked in front of Littleville High like it was a crime scene. Reporters swarmed the gates. Students whispered at every corner. Teachers kept glancing out the window like they were waiting for someone to tell them what to feel. Inside the front office, Principal Whitmore was sweating bullets. The same man who once asked Zaria if she had provoked attention was now dodging voicemails from national outlets and issuing no-comment statements like Band-Aids over bullet wounds. The administration scrambled to rewrite their story. Emails were drafted. PR teams were consulted, but it was too late, because the truth wasn't in their version anymore. It was in the footage, in the cracked concrete, in Carter's limp wrist and panicked eyes, and in the girl who never raised her voice. That evening, Zaria's parents showed up at the school, not to yell, not to stage a protest. They came with purpose. They came with a civil rights attorney. Her name was Naomi Gaines, calm, sharp. No nonsense. She had handled cases like this before, in towns much bigger than Littleville, and she didn't come asking questions. She came with documentation, security footage, screenshots of threats, student witness statements, formal complaints. Everything the school had tried to keep quiet now stapled neatly into legal folders. They didn't ask for a meeting. They filed. They went on record. They let the district know in writing that they weren't going away quietly. Meanwhile, Sheriff Glenn Rowe called a press conference. Standing behind a podium adorned with the county seal, he looked directly into the camera and said, "We reject the false narrative being spread online. My son is the victim of a violent overreaction." It didn't land. Not this time. Not when the internet had already watched the full story unfold. Not when the son of the sheriff, who once laughed while tying a girl to a pole, was now caught on camera begging to be let go. The backlash hit hard. Comment sections erupted. Editorials questioned the sheriff's moral compass. Podcasts ran episodes titled "Power, Race, and a Flagpole in Littleville." Even the governor's office issued a vague statement about ongoing reviews of district leadership. Inside the school, the walls began to shake. Figuratively, at first. Then, literally. The school board called an emergency session, but this time, they weren't the ones in charge. Seated front and center were two new faces, the county prosecutor and an inspector from the State Department of Education. No cameras were allowed inside the room, but word traveled fast. Evidence was reviewed. The freshman girl, Alyssa, returned to give a full statement. This time, her voice didn't tremble. She told them about the threats Carter and his friends made after she tried to speak up. She read the text out loud, and just like that, the room turned. Zaria's story was no longer just about her. It was about culture, about fear, about a school that had protected silence over justice. Mr. Travers, the vice principal, admitted he should have acted faster. Ms. Landry stood and described exactly what she saw that day in the courtyard, and when it was all said and done, the board voted. Carter Rowe was removed from all school activities, banned from attending campus, and referred to the Juvenile Accountability Board. Principal Whitmore was dismissed, effective immediately. No applause followed, just the heavy stillness of accountability. And in the front row, Zaria sat in a crisp white button-down, eyes steady, hands folded. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply listened. And when it was done, she stood, straightened her sleeves, and walked out of the room with the same grace she carried the day she was tied to that flagpole. But this time, the world was watching, and this time, she was walking free. It would have been easy to disappear after that, to ride the wave of public sympathy, give a few interviews, maybe post a tearful statement on social media, and then slowly fade back into the quiet corner of the world she'd come from. But that was never Zaria Bennett. She didn't want a platform. She wanted purpose. So instead of chasing the headlines, she returned to something far more powerful. A Tuesday afternoon in the old gymnasium at Littleville High. The lights flickered overhead. The air smelled like dust, waxed wood, and old echoes. But it wasn't empty anymore. Zaria stood at the front of the room, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair pulled back. No makeup, no cameras. Just her and 10 girls who had chosen to show up. Some were freshmen. A few sophomores, even one senior who had once walked past Zaria in the hallway without a second glance. Now, they came early. Now they rolled out the mats together. Zaria didn't have a title. She wasn't on staff. She wasn't officially sanctioned, but none of them cared. They called it Tuesdays with Zaria. No one missed a session. She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. Her presence did the talking. Her posture did the leading. And when she did say something, it stuck. "You don't have to be strong all the time," she told them once, after a particularly grueling drill. "But you do need to know when someone's crossed a line, and you better be ready." They listened. Not because she shouted, but because her silence now carried weight. She showed them how to plant their feet, how to breathe when pressure builds, how to move through fear instead of around it. She taught them not just how to defend themselves, but how to stand still without shrinking, how to hold space without apology. And in that gym, something extraordinary began to grow. Not just skills, not just strength, but belief in themselves, in each other, in the possibility that power didn't have to look like volume or violence. It could look like stillness. It could look like presence. It could look like a girl who once stood tied to a flagpole, now leading others on how to never let it happen again. Word spread fast. More girls asked to join. The district called to review the nature of the sessions. But when parents and teachers showed up to observe, all they saw was discipline, community, healing. So they let it continue. Zaria never framed herself as a leader. She just kept showing up. Even when the news vans moved on, even when the hashtags faded, even when Carter Rowe's name stopped trending and the gossip threads got bored and moved on to someone else's scandal. She stayed, she taught, she built. Because power, she had learned, wasn't something you displayed once and kept forever. It had to be renewed, reinforced, shared. Coach Quinn visited once. He didn't say much, just nodded as he watched from the corner. When the session ended and the girls were tying their shoes and laughing in soft voices, he leaned over to Zaria. "You still mad?" he asked. Zaria paused, looked past him, then nodded just once. "No," she said. "I just finally understand what silence can become. And what I can become too." He smiled, said nothing more, just walked away. That night back at home, Zaria sat alone in her room. Her black belt rested on the desk. Not hung on the wall, not displayed like a trophy, just there. Within reach, earned, folded. Ready She didn't need applause. She didn't need validation. Because what mattered most was no longer what people said about her. It was what they felt because of her. And in that quiet, steady way, Zaria Bennett was doing something most adults never figured out how to do. She was turning survival into strength, and strength into legacy. Rex Rowe was gone. Whisked away to some expensive private academy upstate, the kind of place where consequences came with a PR statement and emotional counseling rather than accountability. His name still floated through group chats and whispered gossip, but the weight behind it had changed. He was no longer feared. He was forgotten, a ghost in a varsity jacket. At Littleville High, the halls felt quieter. Not silent like before, but intentional. Teachers were paying closer attention. Students walked a little taller. The jokes hit different. The looks held longer. There was a tension in the air, but also a clarity. Something had shifted. The flagpole still stood in the courtyard, casting its same long shadow, but no one looked at it the same way anymore. It had become a symbol not of humiliation, but of reckoning. A line had been crossed there, and then it had been redrawn. Permanently. As for Sheriff Glenn Rowe, his microphone days were done. After his attempt to spin the story backfired in the national press, the calls started piling up. Community leaders demanded a full review. Advocacy groups dug into old cases. Reporters uncovered a trail of silence stretching back years. Students who had come forward, parents who had raised concerns, investigations that never made it past the principal's office. And then came the moment no one thought would happen. He resigned, quietly. Officially, permanently, no press conference this time. No farewell speech, just a headline in the local paper, and then a blank space. Zaria didn't follow that part of the story. She wasn't tracking the fallout, wasn't refreshing social media to see what people were saying. She didn't need to. She had moved on. The world was busy discussing her. But she was building something else. Students began calling her Coach B in the gym, a nickname that started as a joke but quickly stuck. A few parents stopped by to thank her. Some brought bottled water or fresh mats for the sessions. A local business owner donated uniforms. Nobody asked Zaria for a speech. They just kept showing up, and she kept making space. One Thursday evening, Ms. Landry visited the gym. She stood by the entrance, arms crossed, watching quietly as the girls practiced breathing drills. Afterward, she pulled Zaria aside. "You changed this place," she said. "You know that, right?" Zaria shook her head. "I didn't change it. I just stopped letting it change me." Ms. Landry smiled, the kind of smile that came with knowing how rare it is to witness something true. Outside, the evening light filtered through the gym's high windows. The sky burned orange, like it was closing one story and beginning another. Zaria stepped out into it. She didn't carry a trophy. She didn't wear her black belt across her waist. She didn't need symbols anymore. Because now, when she walked through the halls of Littleville High, students didn't look away. They looked up, not with fear, but with recognition, with something like respect, the kind that isn't given because of who your father is or what jacket you wear. The kind that's earned in silence, held in stillness, and passed on in every breath, every step, every Tuesday and Thursday on those old gym mats. Zaria Bennett didn't just survive. She rewrote the rules, and the system that once asked her to sit down and be quiet now had no choice but to listen. It started with 4 girls. Fresh faces, hesitant steps, and unsure eyes that flicked nervously toward the old gym entrance. None of them said much when they walked in. Just nodded, just changed into sweats and rolled out the mats together. By the third week, there were 8. Some came from freshman halls, others from neighborhoods Zaria remembered all too well. Word had spread, not because of flyers or announcements, but because someone whispered, "You should go. It's different." And it was. Not a self-defense class exactly, not a martial arts program either. There were no uniforms. No ranking systems, no trophies on the wall, just mats, breath, movement, and presence. Zaria didn't stand in front of them with a clipboard or a whistle. She didn't make speeches. She just began slow and steady, teaching what had kept her grounded when the world had tried to undo her. This was not about perfect kicks or polished form. This was about knowing where your body begins and ends. This was about what to do when someone steps too close. It was about recognizing the line before it gets crossed. They practiced stance. Not for power, but for stability. They practiced breath, not for performance, but for control. They learned how to fall without fear, and most importantly, they learned how to get back up without permission. Zaria never called herself a coach. But the girls did. "Coach B," they'd say with a smirk, half teasing, half reverent, and she never corrected them. Because maybe that's what she was now, not a leader by title, a leader by example. One Thursday, a new girl showed up, thin shoulders, ponytail too tight. A hoodie zipped to the neck, even though the gym was warm. She didn't speak during introductions, didn't smile. But when Zaria showed the group a simple release move, how to break a wrist grab gently, efficiently, the girl's eyes locked on, like she'd been waiting for someone to show her that move her whole life. After practice, the girl lingered by the bleachers. Zaria walked over, towel in hand. "You okay?" she asked, quiet. The girl nodded. "Do you want to come back next week?" Another nod, then a whisper. "Can we do that move again?" "The one where you don't have to yell to make someone let go?" Zaria smiled. "Every week," she said, "as many times as you want." That night, Zaria sat in her room, her black belt resting in her lap, not as something to wear, but something to remember. It had taken her years to earn it, but what it meant had changed. Back then, it stood for survival. Now, it stood for something more. For transmission. For teaching others how not to flinch. Coach Quinn stopped by the gym one evening. He didn't bring gear. He didn't say much. He just watched. After practice, as the girls packed up, he leaned against the wall beside Zaria. "You've built something here," he said. Zaria wiped her forehead with a towel. "I'm just giving them what I wish someone had given me." Quinn nodded slowly. "They listen to you," he said. "I don't say much. That's why they listen." Weeks turned into months. The group grew. Sometimes they trained in pairs. Sometimes Zaria had them move in silence, listening only to their breath and their feet on the mat. And every now and then, she'd pause. Just long enough to say something simple. "You're allowed to take up space. You're not here to be polite. You're here to be present. Strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about knowing you can break and still choose to rebuild." And they listened. Because her words didn't come from a book, they came from a flagpole, from a bruise she never showed anyone, from a scream she never released, from every moment she chose presence over performance. Some girls only came once or twice. Some stayed. One wrote a poem and taped it to the mirror in the locker room. It read, "She stood so still, they thought she had no fire. But when the wind came, she didn't move. She became the wind." Zaria didn't cry when she read it. But she did keep it, folded in her notebook, carried in her bag. Proof that silence wasn't weakness. It was depth. It was waiting. It was power in disguise. And now, she was passing it on mat by mat, breath by breath, girl by girl. The gym wasn't the only place Zaria's name was starting to echo. One morning during homeroom, a sophomore quietly asked a teacher if they could use a quote from Coach B for their English essay. She didn't say it in class, the student explained, but it stuck with me. At first, it was subtle. A mention in a guidance counselor's meeting, a parent asking at a PTA forum, "Who's the girl who runs those sessions? My daughter says she sleeps better now." The district never made a formal announcement. There was no spotlight, but her name traveled anyway, not with fame, but with weight. Not like a trend, like a truth. In the cafeteria, students who once walked past Zaria without a glance now gave her space not out of fear, but out of recognition. Out of respect. In the teacher's lounge, someone left a copy of her story from the school paper, folded on the table. Headline written in quiet type, "Still. Strong." Zaria never asked to be written about. She never called a reporter. But a student in the yearbook club had been watching for months and decided people needed to read about her. The article didn't list the fight. It didn't name Carter Row. It simply talked about what it felt like to be in the room when Zaria stood at the front. "She doesn't try to lead," the writer said. "She just never disappears." That line found its way into Instagram captions, into text messages between friends, into a local podcast hosted by two former students who had graduated years before but still followed the school's stories online. The host said, "I don't know what it is about this girl, but she reminds me of the kind of people who shift things without trying. She's not looking for a seat at the table, she's building something outside the building." And that's exactly what it felt like. Zaria wasn't performing strength, she was living it, breathing it. And others were beginning to mirror it. One evening, a mother stopped her in the parking lot. Her daughter had been attending sessions for a month. "She doesn't talk a lot at home," the mother said softly. "But last night, she showed me how to break a grip with 2 fingers. Then she looked me in the eye and said, 'I'm not scared of walking to the bus stop anymore.'" Zaria didn't know what to say, so she nodded. The mother took a breath. "Whatever you're doing in there, keep doing it." Word reached beyond Littleville. Another school asked if Zaria would be willing to visit their campus, talk to students. She said no. Not out of rudeness, she just wasn't ready. She wasn't interested in becoming a symbol on a stage. She was too busy being present in a room. But the requests kept coming. An editor from a regional magazine called her teacher. A non-profit emailed the school district about partnership. And one day, an old woman showed up during practice. She watched from the door for 10 minutes, then stepped forward slowly. Her name was Mrs. Beauchamp. She'd taught literature at Littleville back in the 70s. "Back then, we had girls who burned so quietly you'd never know they had a match in their hand," she said. She paused, watching Zaria adjust a student's stance. You remind me of the ones who learned how to use the fire before it burned them." Zaria didn't know what to say. She had never met this woman, but somehow the recognition didn't need backstory. Mrs. Beauchamp handed her a small book of poems, dog-eared, spine cracked. "Give this to one of the girls who needs a voice." Then she turned and walked out. No farewell, no thank you, just legacy, passed hand to hand. Zaria kept the book in her locker. She didn't open it for weeks, but when she did, she found a note written inside the front cover. In blue ink, faded with time, "To the girl who stands still so others can move." That's when Zaria realized something. She was no longer surviving a moment. She was building momentum. And it was reaching places she'd never set foot, not through speeches, not through spotlights, but through the quiet, repeated act of showing up. And somehow, that presence, consistent, calm, undeniable, was beginning to leave a mark deeper than anything viral ever could. It wasn't a press conference. It wasn't a viral clip. There were no microphones, no backdrops, no flashing lights, just a quiet room at the community center on a rainy Wednesday evening. The folding chairs were arranged in a circle, the walls lined with old bulletin boards and faded photos of student art projects. A pot of coffee simmered in the back. The kind of space where people came to talk when they weren't sure anyone else would listen. The invitation had come from Ms. Rivera, a local counselor who ran a youth circle for girls dealing with anxiety, bullying, and what she called the stuff we carry but don't name. Zaria hadn't planned to accept. But something about the way Ms. Rivera had asked stayed with her. "We don't need your story," she'd said. "We just need your presence. And if you want to speak, the space is yours." So Zaria went. She wore a plain hoodie and jeans, hair pulled back, no notes in her hands. She didn't sit in the center. She didn't take the tallest chair. She just listened. The room was mostly filled with teens, some younger than her, a few older. A couple of teachers sat quietly in the back, arms folded, faces unreadable. One girl spoke about being followed on her way home from school. Another shared how she stopped raising her hand in class because she got tired of being mocked for trying too hard. Someone asked what to do when even adults made you feel small. Zaria didn't interrupt. She just nodded. The session was almost over when Mrs. Rivera looked at her. "Zaria," she said gently, "is there anything you'd like to add?" The room turned, soft and respectful. Zaria sat with the silence for a moment. Then she exhaled. "I used to think silence was a weakness," she said. A few people leaned in. "I thought, if you didn't speak up, you were letting people win. That being quiet meant you were scared or didn't care enough to fight." Her voice didn't shake. It didn't rise, but it carried. "But what I learned is, silence can be a weapon too. Not one to hurt with, one to hold." She paused. "To hold your ground. To hold your breath when everyone's waiting for you to snap. To hold your dignity when someone's trying to strip it from you." She looked around the room. Eyes met hers without flinching. "When they tied me to that flagpole, I didn't yell, not because I couldn't, but because I knew my silence would echo louder than their laughter ever could." The room was completely still. That silence, she continued, wasn't empty. It was full. Full of everything I'd learned from every time I'd been overlooked, underestimated, or pushed aside. It was full of years of being told to shrink myself and choosing not to. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. I don't think power always looks like yelling the loudest or swinging first. I think sometimes It looks like standing still while the world loses its mind around you, and knowing who you are without needing anyone else to say it back. Someone sniffled softly in the back row. Zaria folded her hands in her lap. "I used to survive by being invisible," she said. "Now I survive by showing up. Quietly, fully, and without apology." She didn't speak again for the rest of the session. She didn't need to. Because in that moment, she'd said more than enough. After the meeting, a girl who hadn't said a single word all night approached her by the doorway. She didn't say anything. Just reached into her pocket and handed Zaria a folded scrap of paper. Zaria opened it when she got home. Inside were 6 words written in uneven handwriting. "Thank you for teaching me stillness." Zaria pinned the note to the corner of her mirror. Not as a reminder of what she'd said, but as a reminder of what happens when silence stops being survival and becomes strength. The headlines faded, just like she knew they would. The video stopped trending, the hashtags slowed, the news vans moved on to the next crisis. And one by one, the people who had once shouted her name began to lower their voices again. But Zaria didn't mind. She hadn't done any of it for the noise. She never wanted to be the face of a movement. She never dreamed of being a symbol. She just wanted to exist, unbothered and fully herself, in a world that had tried again and again to make her smaller. And now, in the quiet that followed the storm, she finally could. The gym stayed open. Tuesdays and Thursdays became routine. The group changed over time. Some girls graduated, new ones took their place. But the energy never shifted. It remained steady, like her. Zaria no longer flinched when people said her name in the hallway. Teachers asked for her opinion during discussions. Younger students stopped her to ask if the rumors were true, not about the fight, but about the way she stood still when everything else fell apart. She always answered the same way. "I was there. Not more. Not less. Just the truth." One afternoon, Ms. Landry invited her to speak at the school's leadership day. Zaria politely declined. "Let someone else talk this year," she said with a soft smile. "I've said what I needed to say." And she had. In silence, in stillness, in showing up. She had spoken to people who would never forget the way she walked, the way she held space without asking for it. She had become a mirror, not reflecting perfection, but possibility. That was more than enough. One Saturday in early spring, Zaria passed the old flagpole. She didn't stop. She didn't need to. It didn't haunt her. It reminded her that she had once been bound, and chose to rise, not with fire, but with form. Not with volume, but with value. Later that evening, she sat in her room alone. The black belt lay neatly folded in the drawer. She didn't wear it anymore, but she didn't put it away either. It wasn't a weapon, it wasn't a trophy, it was part of her. On her desk was a notebook filled with names and notes drills she'd created, thoughts she wanted to pass down, lessons learned the hard way. It wasn't for publishing, it wasn't for credit. It was just there, waiting for whoever needed it next. That night, she stepped outside and walked through her neighborhood. The streetlights buzzed faintly. The air was cool and clean. She passed the old market, the elementary school where she first learned to spell strength, the bench she used to sit on before she understood what silence could do. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same, not because the world had changed, but because she had, and in her change, others had found permission. to speak softer, to stand straighter, to walk with steadier breath. At a stoplight, a car slowed. The window rolled down. A girl, maybe 12, maybe 13, smiled shyly from the passenger seat. "You're Zaria, right?" Zaria nodded once, surprised. "I come on Thursdays sometimes. You showed me how to pivot when someone grabs your wrist." Zaria smiled gently. "You still practicing?" The girl nodded. "My older brother doesn't mess with me anymore." The light turned green. "Thank you," the girl said, and the car pulled away. Zaria stood there for a moment, blinking against the wind. Then she turned, kept walking, not toward anything. Just forward, just steady, just Zaria. And sometimes that's all the ending you need. No applause, no anthem. Just one girl still, and the world, finally learning how to listen. Sometimes the quietest people carry the strongest fire. Zaria Bennett didn't raise her voice. She didn't seek revenge. She didn't ask for a stage. Yet, in her stillness, she moved an entire system. Her story reminds us that dignity doesn't always come wrapped in speeches or headlines. It often lives in silent endurance and in the choice to stand when others turn away. For those of us who have lived long enough to know the cost of speaking out and the weight of staying quiet, Zaria's journey speaks volumes. She teaches us that silence is not weakness when it's rooted in self-awareness and purpose. It can be powerful, protective, even healing. And perhaps most importantly, her story is a reminder that it's never too late to lead, not with noise, but with presence, not by demanding change, but by becoming it. In a world that rushes to speak, maybe it's the still ones who show us the way.